So now we're going to move on to our first panel of the day, and it features the all-important manufacturers. I won't be setting the scene. I'm very, very excited to say that your moderator for this is Joanna Bailey, who I'm sure is a very familiar name, but maybe not a familiar face to many of you. Joanna is the editor of Simple Flying. I'm sure this has appeared in your inbox or your Facebook feed or whatever it may be. We have a really long-standing relationship with Simple Flying. I first met Joe and the founder, the initial founder, Aaron, at the Paris Air Show in 2019, and they were a blog. They are now the biggest aviation website in the world in terms of visibility. And Joe's been a huge part. She's been there since day one. She's also one of my close neighbors. She lives in just over the bridge in Cornwall. I'm in Devon, and she's come all the way here to take part in AviaDev, and it's a real delight. So please allow me to introduce Jo, welcome her to the stage, and then she will introduce her panel.
Thank you, John. That was a really delightful introduction. I think you might have hyped me up a little bit too much, though, so apologies if I'm a big disappointment. But I just very briefly want to thank John for his never-ending support for Simple Flying. You know, as he said, he met us when we were in our infancy, but he had this really strong belief that we could do something good. And all through my career with Simple Flying, he has pushed me to do things that I'm not comfortable with at all. Go and do a podcast, he says. I hate the sound of my voice. Go and do some webinars with major airline CEOs and broadcast them for all the world to see. Terrifying. Let's do a live event with cameras and broadcasting to the world. He keeps throwing me to the lion's den, and I must say, today, I feel completely thrown to the lions. Thank you, John, for this opportunity and for your belief, because I do have with me all the major OEMs. As we know, it's a bittersweet rivalry that should make for a lively discussion, shall we say. So without further ado, let's welcome my panelists to the stage. From Boeing, we have Kuljit Ghata-Aura. From Airbus, Andrew Armitstead. Hussein Dabbas is with us from Embraer. And from Rolls-Royce, the great Jason Sutcliffe. So guys, please come on up and take a seat. So while the guys are getting comfortable, I want to throw up our first poll for you guys to have a think about. You know, we are going to talk about planes. It's kind of my thing. So let's start by poking the ant's nest a little bit. What plane should African Airlines be investing in? Is it Andrew's Airbus A220? Is it Hussein's Embraer E2? Is it the Boeing 737 from Kuljit there? Or is it something completely different? Guys, please do vote. We'll come back to that in a minute and see what you think. It is anonymous. Yeah, we're not going to tell them what you voted for, so don't worry. So we are, as I say, going to talk about planes, but this isn't a sales pitch. This is about the opportunities, the challenges, and how these guys view Africa, the importance of this continent to these companies that are so big in aviation. I just want to start by reflecting on some of the things I've learned over the last 24 hours, some of the things I've heard other people much cleverer than me talking about up here. Africa has, 18–20% of the world's population, but 2 or 3% of the passenger traffic. Of that 2 or 3%, 80% of the international passenger traffic is operated by non-African airlines. There are 300 registered airlines in Africa, but there's only a handful that are profitable. Africa is woefully underserved. How many times have I heard that in the last day? There is $6.7 trillion worth of value in African aviation just waiting to be unlocked. You know, these guys want a slice of that very attractive pie. But where should airlines be investing? You know, great ideas have fallen flat by poor investments. So let's return to the poll if we can, AV, please, and see what you guys think airlines should be investing in. Ooh, very interesting. So we're going to go to the panelists. Can you guys see how they voted? Oh, you can. You've got a screen.
We have a big team here
Awesome. Well, what we want to do is talk about Africa, not about these products. You know, we don't want this to be a case of my plane's better than yours. But let's see if by the end they've changed your mind at all. So, guys, good morning. It was an awesome night last night. I hope everybody's heads are as sore as mine is. So let's start by talking about the opportunity in Africa. How important is Africa to your company? Andrew, you're closest to me. Let's hear your thoughts.
Okay, so I think the nice thing about this conference, and one thing we all have in common, I think we all believe in the potential of Africa. I think that's the beauty of all of us here today, all of us on the panel, is that we believe in the potential of Africa. From Airbus's perspective, why is Africa important to us? I'll give you two reasons, really. One is we have 40 operators now in Africa. And that's a lot of operators. You know, that's more than North America, that's more than South America. And from Airbus's point of view, it doesn't matter whether those operators have 1 aircraft or 30 aircraft. They're all our customers, and our job is to make sure that they succeed and that they have a healthy airline, well supported, and are successful. The second reason I'm going to give is, again, it's down to forecasts. So our global market forecast predicts that intra-Africa traffic will grow by 7.6% per annum in the next 10 years. Now, that's a very high number. That's one of the biggest growth rates we see in the world. So we all know there's potential here, and it's about helping the aviation industry fulfill that potential for us.
Fantastic, thank you. And I know, Boeing, you also do lots of analysis on market opportunities. What do you see as the opportunity here? How important is Africa to you?
Look, I think Africa is, you know, for all the reasons that we've heard while we've been at the conference. I mean, this is one of the great growth economies. It's one of the last great growth stories, and so for any manufacturer to not focus very heavily on Africa and be well positioned to really capture that growth in the next 20 years, it would be very remiss. So look, from our perspective, our CMO, our commercial market outlook, which we put out last year, and an updated one will come out at Farnborough, it shows very strong growth in African aviation. I think we're looking at around 1,000 planes by 2040. We believe that will be predominantly dominated by the narrow body, around 72%, with the remainder being the wide body. And again, to what Andrew just said, this is we're all very consistent on this. It's going to be driven by intra-Africa travel. So this is a strong growing market. We're very lucky at Boeing. We're starting from a strong base. We've got around 500 planes in operation with around 60 operators, which accounts for almost 70% of the in-fleet aircraft at the moment. So, you know, we're here to obviously develop that, work with customers, and just be part of the great growth here in Africa.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Embraer next. That demand for narrow body and regional, that must be really good news for you. What are you guys looking at in terms of requirements for aircraft here?
Actually, I mean, just to add to what my colleagues have said, we believe very strongly that there is a huge demand going to be coming over to the continent. The studies that we have concluded indicate that by 2040 there will be a need for around 280 aircraft with less than 150 seats. So the demand is there. We have to also understand that the average age of airplanes today in Africa is around 17 years, which is one of the oldest. And for a long time, and things have changed now, Africa was a dumping ground for old and used aircraft. And this has changed now, and we're seeing that more airlines want to buy either brand new airplanes or less old airplanes, let's put it that way. The demand is growing. The middle class, we expect to grow, even though we believe that during the pandemic that middle class has dropped a bit because of all the effects of COVID and so on. But the demand growth is coming back very high. The GDP growth in Africa is also quite good. It's over 3.5%, which is above the world average. So all these combined will create the right market for airlines to buy and get and acquire new aircraft. So the demand is there. We're very confident of the continent. We believe that everybody is moving in the right direction when it comes to civil aviation.
Fantastic, thank you. And Jason, where does Rolls-Royce fit into all this? What's your focus in Africa?
So just to say, I'm quite happy because we power Airbus, Boeing, and Embraer products in Africa. So my job's done. I'm off.
It's a win-win-win for you.
So no, honestly, it pains me sometimes when the airlines don't have the proper strategy. So Africa World, for example, they took Embraer 145s, ERJs, did a fantastic job and has started to grow that business. We've seen airlines that have just gone straight in at the top, buying brand new wide bodies and nowhere to fly them. There needs to be a proper strategy from an airline perspective. We can help with that. Consultants, again, yes, they can, but you know, do they know Africa? I don't think there are many people that know Africa well enough to come down here and say, right, this is what you need to do. Too many airlines from the Middle East and elsewhere are eating the lunch down here, right? You know, SAA needs to grow. We need to find a way to build Africa back up again and build those fleets back up again properly, not just by buying the biggest, flashiest aircraft and saying, right, we've got a piece to go and fly now. Where are you going to fly it? There's so many aircraft sat on the ground with nowhere to fly. They need to use them. And I think an inter-Africa airline connecting, I think Kenya and SAA talking, that needs to happen initially. Then maybe they go off on their own once they've got those routes set up. But ultimately, from a Rolls-Royce perspective, pre-COVID, we had a facility down in Johannesburg for engine storage. We're talking to SAAT about being our mechanics and our team in region. COVID happened. Now it's time to regroup and then look to the future and see where we think Africa's going to go. But I think ultimately there's a lot of training needs to be done. I think there's a lot of expertise get trained up in Africa and then move on. We need people to be trained in Africa and stay here, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hussein described Africa as a dumping ground for old aircraft. A lot of those aircraft have got your name on it. What can Boeing do to help airlines move on from these older jets and get into something that's newer and more efficient?
Look, I think you know, all these discussions need to start with the customer. You know, there's no. I think we would all agree that you know, Jason just said it. You don't want to just impose your own products on the customer. You've got to actually talk to them, understand what they're trying to do, because ultimately, when you do that, you're going to have a more viable customer. You're going to have a customer that's going to be happy to take delivery of the aircraft, is going to be able to support the aircraft, because let's not forget that's absolutely paramount. And you know, one of the things that I would say that plays into that whole decision making is the interoperability of the fleet. You know, we talked a lot about the costs of doing business here in Africa, and of course we hope that as liberalisation comes in, that might change. But ultimately, having a fleet where you've got commonality, you've got interoperability is going to really help you. So look, there are a lot of decisions that will go into that. I think you've got a panel on financing that comes up next. That's absolutely key. But everything starts with that discussion with a customer. I mean, it's really that simple. Understanding what routes they're going to fly. You know, we feel that we've got the newer products that would satisfy pretty much every customer, and so, but it's got to start from there.
Brilliant. But one place where Boeing is lacking is at the bottom end, right? And this is where you guys come in. You know, we talk about Africa as if it's one place, but of course this is a huge continent with some very different types of operating environments, different types of demand. Can I ask, how is the A220 doing here?
We think it's an aircraft with great potential for Africa, but as my colleagues rightly say, it's really about making sure an airline makes the right fleet decisions. Equally, we're not going to push one particular product on one particular airline. Every airline is different. It has an installed fleet, it has its own markets, and we'll match the aircraft to the right customer. We'll help the airline make the right decision. So, yeah, we think the A220 is a great product in terms of its size and its range capability for that intra-Africa need. So we think we're well placed, but there are plenty of other choices out there, and we'll help them make the right choices.
Absolutely. Would you ever recommend an E2?
I think I'd struggle to recommend that, but yeah, like I say, airlines have their own needs, and they have installed fleet as well. They have aircraft in service, and often with, for example, the A220, it's a new type, so the airline has to be ready to take on that new type, and of course we'll always give them the support and the services that they need to bring a new aircraft type into service.
Fantastic. Let's talk about the E2 a little bit. I mean, that has got to be a great plane for Africa. Have you got much interest?
Well, let me start by saying two things. In Africa, 97% of flights into regional Africa have less than 150 passengers, which means also that 70% of them are operating with less than a daily frequency, which in business terms, that is no longer viable. You need to have a high seat factor to generate the revenues. And in Africa, it's around 71%, while the break-even is towards the 80% seat factor. So these things are costing the airlines a lot of money. According to IATA, African airlines, they lose $1 on every passenger they carry. I mean, this is absurd. If you have such a system, you can never make money, you can never invest in new airplanes and so on. We believe, and I'm sure my colleagues in Boeing and Airbus also believe, that the need for African carriers now is to have the right size airplane for the route. You can't just bring airplanes in and then think where you want to fly them. You need to do it the other way around by doing your own studies and then decide what aircraft you should be operating. And unfortunately, we do see sometimes that still African carriers, they all want to become huge airlines from day one. This doesn't work. Nobody can become Emirates or Qatar or KLM or Singapore Airlines overnight. So they need to grow gradually. And unfortunately, we heard it yesterday from many of the speakers, you still need to go via Paris or Dubai to cross Africa, which is absurd. I mean, really, seriously, why is it so difficult? But again, if you look at airline tickets in Africa, they're 40% more expensive than in Europe. And in Europe, the average income is much higher than it is in Africa. So it is a chicken and the egg kind of an issue. When can you generate more business? If you're too expensive, the governments impose huge taxes. The entry regulations are horrendous. If you want to go to a country in Western Africa, the visa is $150. I mean, seriously, why? The governments can make a lot of money from the services that they provide, the hotels, the taxis, the food, the transportation, not always just charging the passengers to come in. And this is stifling a lot of airlines to really start making the right amounts of money and revenue and invest in new airplanes.
Thank you, great thoughts. And while we're talking about Embraer planes, I do want to mention the turboprop you guys are working on, which you keep promising is coming. Have you done any sort of market analysis on that? Because I'm a huge fan of turboprops. I'm very excited to see a new one coming out.
Actually, we are. We have launched a program working on it, and so hopefully by 28, we believe there is a room for turboprops. And in many countries, we've seen that huge interest in Africa, the same as in the United States. Some countries, some regions don't really work with turboprops. For example, the Far East is not a region for turboprops, but we believe the turboprop is the right aircraft for many destinations. And let's not forget that we have a lot of short runways here, we have unpaved runways and so on, and the turboprop will be the right aircraft. So we are launching a program for turboprops, two versions, 70-seater and 90-seater, using the same fuselage of the E2, which has lower operating costs than our competitors in the turboprop market, as well as being able to serve these small secondary routes that will be in demand in this continent.
So somebody was saying at our roundtable yesterday, Africans like to fly in big planes. You know, they don't want a turboprop. They don't want an A220 or an E2. How can you support the airlines that are still flying these older, bigger jets? And, you know, they're paying a lot for their fuel. They're paying, you know, they're not able to fill the aircraft, but they want the big plane. Please, Kuljit.
Look, I think, look, again, you know, I hate generalizations, right? I think that, I mean, I don't know what the substantiation for that statement that Africans like to fly on big planes is, but let's go with that for a little bit. But look, I mean, you know, it will take time for, you know, even if new fleet decisions are made and the new aircraft come through, the efficiencies associated with that are going to take time, because you're not just going to replace every single aircraft that's in operation in Africa overnight. So I think, you know, one thing that I would say really we have found has enhances the operational efficiency is really the digital products that you can put on the aircraft. And there's a whole array of them, you know, through our subsidiary Jefferson. We've got a number of really terrific trip planning apps that really help to, you know, save fuel. We've got an aircraft health management product that can be really used to get into that whole area of predictive maintenance. We also do that actually on the military side of the house. We've got this fantastic product called the Aircraft Data Reasoner that we put on the C-17, which is that magnificent big transport aircraft. And again, that's reducing so many maintenance operations because of the predictive nature. And there are many of these, you know, that really, when they're deployed, can provide a sort of an emission saving of something like 12%. And really improve efficiency, things like continuous descent approaches, you know, and weather. You know, I had an extremely bumpy ride on the way over. But yeah, look, so I'll leave it at that. But I think that obviously there's a lot of efficiency you can get out of improvements in network operations, and digital plays a huge part in that.
Thank you. That's very insightful. There we go. Now we can see you guys as well, and you can see us. Andrew.
So I would agree. It's about efficiencies. You know, I think one thing that's been come up in the past couple of days is that African airlines need to improve their efficiency, and there's a new generation of products out there that can help them do that. And there is the newer incentive now of decarbonisation. So new generation aircraft, 25% lower fuel burn and carbon emissions than the older generation. So there is that new dynamic in the industry as well. So new generation aircraft are part of the route towards the decarbonisation of the industry. So that's important as well. Whether it's big aircraft or small aircraft, I think the demand across the board will be there for both types. But of course, I think single-aisle aircraft are flying further and further now, and of course with the A321XLR, there's new opportunities there to fly very long routes with single-aisle aircraft, and we make sure that the comfort of those aircraft is up to the standard of wide-body aircraft. So I think there is a dynamic shift in the market.
Where could you go from Cape Town, for example? How far north could you go in an XLR?
Certainly all of Africa and into probably the Middle East and southern part of Europe. So, you know, it's getting towards 9-10 hours flight time in an XLR. So that is going to help airlines that maybe either airlines that don't have wide bodies to get into the long-haul market, or airlines that have wide bodies, but really there's not enough routes there to fill a wide body. They can open new routes with a smaller long-haul aircraft.
Fantastic. You touched on sustainability there, and Jason, this is something I know Rolls-Royce are doing lots of work on. Post-COVID, I would see sustainability and carbon reduction as the biggest challenge that faces aviation in the next decade or two. Tell us a bit about your hopes for Africa on the sustainability side.
Well, I think like the guys were saying, it is, I guess, a buzzword that's here to stay in the post-COVID world. I mean, today you can fly any engines on a 50% SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. All our engines are going to be capable of 100% by 2023. I think the land that we have potentially in Africa could potentially grow crops for that, but I don't think there's enough chip fat. I don't think there's enough land to satisfy the aviation industry from a non-synthetic perspective. Today, 0.1% of fuel is sustainable aviation fuel. We're going to need 500 million gallons by 2050 to satisfy the requirements. So it's got to be e-fuels. You know, there's a market, there's a potential here to get into the synthetic fuels, e-fuels, and help us to that net negative perspective. But also, I think, you know, next generation, let's be honest, we're not going to be flying 250 people across the world in an electric aeroplane in the next 40, 50 years, okay? So you're still going to need a gas turbine engine. But ultimately, from a training perspective, and just going back to the sustainability perspective, and the regional aircraft, ultimately, yes, you're going to get hybrid electric and electric aircraft that are going to do 400-500 nautical miles. So that, again, is a workforce change. So, you know, I'm a mechanical engineer. Things that I can't see electrically, I struggle with, right? But ultimately, going forward, we're going to need, you know, a change in mindset on not just the engines from a sustainability perspective, but from a workforce perspective. So we went to see the girls' educational program 2 days ago, and you know that age that they need to be thinking about electrical engineering and the future in aviation as well. I think to help Africa, and they're the sort of things that we can perhaps look to support going forward. Because I think Africa really can take that step. So forget the trains, you've got eVTOL, okay? You've got electric aircraft. The infrastructure that you would have put down for train tracks and so on and so forth, you can have that jump in, I guess, in technology that we can actually move forward in Africa with, I believe.
I mean, it's a huge challenge, isn't it? SAF is the short-term solution, but to get that supply where it needs to be and in the quantities it needs to be, it feels insurmountable.
Yeah, and I think that the big problem we've got is SAF is 4 or 5 times more expensive than fuel. Yeah. When we already know the taxation in Africa from the governments on fuel is huge, and that perhaps relates to the more expensive flight tickets. So the governments need to help. They do need to help airlines firstly survive, but then become more sustainable.
Do you think it's fair that airlines in Africa are challenged to meet these sustainability goals in the same way airlines in more developed countries are? I mean, shouldn't they get a free pass to, create the infrastructure and have more time than the rest of the world?
I'm not sure it's down. Obviously, the airlines can make those decisions, but ultimately, I think it's going to come down to the passengers. If you look on a lot of the links now where you can go and book a flight, you can book the most sustainable flight, the one that has least CO2s. So ultimately, if you don't make that change, there's a very good chance that passengers go to the other guys because they've got a more sustainable product. And unfortunately, I think that's the way it may end up going, if because it is being pushed forward. We have these goals that we're all trying to get to, and we're investing billions of dollars to try and accelerate that. But also at the same time, you need to go at a certain pace. it took us 3 or 4 years to get a 500 kilowatt motor. We need a 2 megawatt motor, I think it is, megawatt, to get 15 people in a passenger aircraft to fly. And it took us another 3 years to get there. So yes, we're already flying electric aircraft, but again, that's going to take time. And as we saw before from the NARCO team, it's actually going to be cheaper. Okay, so from a regional perspective and intra-Africa, potentially, you know, if you can go all electric, you're going to offset that price of fuel. You don't need your SAF. You can take those ultimately 20, 25 people on those trips. And if you're flying half empty, then 20, 25%, people in an aircraft is probably good initially. Then you're going to grow from there, and while technology grows.
Kuljit, I know Boeing are doing a lot on electric aviation and electrification of planes. What's your vision for a more sustainable future in Africa?
Yeah, look, I mean, I look at the whole discussion around sustainability as actually bigger than aviation. You know, let's be honest. The world has committed to get to net zero by 2050. Aviation has to play its part. So when I say this is a bigger issue, I mean, we are talking about the future of our children, the future of the planet. But, perspective's always good. I think, the perception around aviation is around the carbon footprint, but actually I think 2% comes out of aviation. Even aviation as a subset of transportation is very low. But we have to do our bit. We have to, in the industry, address the issue. And look, we've been very consistent as a company around the near and near long-term solution is sustainable aviation fuel. And we committed in our sustainability report last year that we would only be manufacturing planes that were 100% capable of flying on 100% sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. And in terms of the cost, I mean, there are places that have been shown where the incentives are in place. So look at California, the costs are not prohibitive. It's going to have to be a concerted effort. Regulators, government, OEMs are all going to have to get on board on this. And the reason we say that this is the near-term solution is that think about all the infrastructure around how planes are fueled currently at airports and other places that would have to change if there was anything more dramatic earlier. We definitely are very interested in hydrogen. Electric, we invested 450 million in a joint venture called Whisk, which produces an eVTOL. And it was really fantastic. I went to see this product in California. It's amazing. I mean, it takes off like a helicopter, and then it operates like a fixed wing, stops in midair and comes back. It's really terrific to see. And that investment was really to get that to commercialization. But we really see that as part of advanced urban air mobility concept. But yeah, I think echoing what was in the previous presentation, the really interesting thing about this is where innovation is going to really help. That's why we're so interested in startups and working with startups, because that's where you're going to get these great jumps in technology, particularly around electricity and batteries and what they can do. So, but given the facts as we're looking at them now, I totally agree with what Jason said as well, which is that for the larger aircraft, it's difficult to see electric and hydrogen playing a huge part in the near term.
Yeah, I'm going to come to you in just a second. But while we're on the topic of eVTOLs, Embraer, of course, have a fairly successful program called Eve.
Yes.
And I believe you guys have sold some in Africa already?
I think my colleague here, Victor, who is in charge of Eve, is more competent to speak about it. But it is gaining a lot of traction. It's of course an intercity kind of an aircraft, an urban area, which is quite innovative. I mean, we look at cities for example, like Sao Paulo, where it has the highest number of helicopters in the world, because people want to move to avoid the congestions on the highways and so on. And I think this would be a great tool for many countries and many airline companies to operate these aircraft. But again, we need to see what kind of regulations that will be imposed by civil aviations. You don't want just airplanes flying like flies everywhere. There must be some rules and regulations to protect the people who are flying these airplanes. And I think it's coming. Definitely, it's a new technology. It's a new vision that countries and people will need to adapt to it. It's we see it in in the Jetsons TV cartoon session, but I think this is becoming part of our life, and we should expect it.
Yeah. I think we all thought we'd be in flying cars by now, when I was a little girl watching that sort of program. But there we go. Very exciting stuff. Andrew, I want to get your thoughts, because Kuljit said there he doesn't see hydrogen playing a huge part in the future of aviation. But you guys are investing a lot into hydrogen development, right?
We're investing, we're exploring everywhere. I think it's a huge challenge for the whole industry, is the decarbonisation of the industry, and Airbus is absolutely committed to be pioneers in that progress. The solution will come from everywhere. It will come from SAF, it will come from synthetic fuels, it will come from electric aircraft, and we believe in hydrogen aircraft as well. I mean, we're committed to bring to the market a zero-emission aircraft by 2035. And our strong belief is that that will be powered by hydrogen. So we're really reorienting our whole company around this decarbonisation goal. The industry is now committed to net zero by 2050. We support that commitment. We hope that ICAO will very soon commit to zero-E by 2050. But what you touched on earlier is how is that going to affect the airlines? There is a cost of decarbonisation, and that's the area that still has to be fully understood, I think. And what we would support is measures that incentivise decarbonisation, so that the smaller airlines, the less financially strong airlines, aren't dissuaded to operate aircraft or grow. It's got to be the decarbonisation process has not got to stifle growth and efficiency, and that's the real challenge I see, is the economics of decarbonisation.
Yeah. I mean, do you think, I'm talking as a European, where we've got the likes of Ryanair and Wizz Air selling flights for €5 or whatever, do you think we need to start accepting that flying is going to be more expensive in some respects?
It depends on the support the industry receives. I mean, it's clear that governments have to support the transition of the global industry, I think, and there are still unknowns as to the economies of scale that come out of SAF production and synthetic fuel production that may actually help take some of the burden of that transition. So that's something we all have to strive towards, is that we can decarbonise and not stifle the industry.
So I want to move on to talk less about the equipment and more about the opportunities and the challenges facing Africa. You guys are experts on this region, and I'm not. So maybe we start with you, Hussein. Can you explain to me what, other than equipment, does Africa need to realise its potential?
I think the major part of African development in aviation is the infrastructure. We heard yesterday from airport experts that airports now have become an attraction. They're becoming shopping malls with airplanes coming to them. It's not just because they want to generate revenue, it's just to make it attractive for a person to want to travel via point A or B or C, because they want to enjoy themselves during the transit time. I would not go through an airport if I have to that doesn't have the right facilities, whether it's restaurants, lounges, shopping. It's part of the entertainment. It's part of the travel. Of course, duty-free makes a big difference. And people generally, when they are flying, they tend to spend more. They don't look very much into their pocket anymore. They are in the mood of traveling, on vacation, on business, whatever it is, and they would spend. What we see in Africa, With few exceptions that are really great examples, the airports still don't have the right infrastructure. And not just the airport, but all the facilities, all the services outside, whether it's roads, highways, hotels, restaurants, and so on. And there is a need to continue building on these things. And airlines can be of great support when they're given the opportunity. I mean, for example, I keep saying this, and maybe I'm just like a broken record. Where would Dubai be without Emirates? You know, it's simple. Emirates created a huge marketing phenomenon of Dubai, which you look at 25, 30 years ago, was a desert. And now it's a metropolis. You know, you talk about New York, London, Dubai, and Singapore. You know, so the airlines do have a lot of influence in developing the countries. And I mean, also when Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore, or the father of Singapore, when he left the UK and went to Singapore, the first thing he said, I want to build a first-class airport and a first-class airline. And both have made Singapore what it is today. And I think African countries need to work very hard on developing the infrastructure so that the airlines can benefit from this infrastructure at a reasonable cost and attract more people to travel to or via those destinations.
Thank you. So infrastructure. Jason, what are your thoughts? What does Africa need?
Truthfully, even pre-COVID, so obviously at Rolls, we don't just have the new aircraft that we place. We look to, and part of my job is to look for used aircraft as well. And we have airlines come to us asking for those particular aircraft, 330s, 777s, and we can locate them. But the airlines struggle getting finance, or a lessor will not lease to an African airline.
Right.
And I think that's a big problem. There's a perception of either corruption, a perception of non-payment, and that needs to be cleaned up. The help, perhaps, of maybe the African Development Bank can act as a guarantor, or to do, a sale and lease back to the African Development Bank, to try and build the fleets up and try and get the confidence in the product. And again, my thoughts are that you need a product that's going to be at that gate at 2:05 on a Tuesday afternoon to take passengers from A to B. It needs to be reliable and robust and get confidence in those passengers to come back again. And quite often, passengers, they want, for me, I'm an aviation enthusiast, so I look at the aircraft and I want to be on the shiniest, nicest thing, but 95% of the passengers want to get on an airplane and care about what AFE they've got and how comfy the seat is. Okay? Get that right, bring the passengers in, start flying. Everything else should come, right? But again, finance, getting the confidence in building an airline. Because I think some of the governments want to start an airline, right? We're going to start an airline, but we need someone to give us the money to do it. And I was like, I'm not doing that. So that, I think, will help.
I found it fascinating yesterday listening to one of the panelists describe African aviation as lurching from one election to the next, and how those conversations about buying planes, it's about, how many shall we get in the next 4 years, not what's our 10-year, 20-year, 30-year plan. So interesting thoughts. Thank you. Kuljit, I'm sure you've got some additions there.
Yeah, sure. I would really look at talent. I think that, look, nothing's going to grow, nothing's going to develop without people development. This continent has got a large number of young people. In some of the parts of this continent, there's large rates of unemployment. We estimated as part of, alongside our CMO, that there'd be a requirement for something like 62,000 jobs in aviation across pilots, cabin crew and technicians. And I think that represents a terrific opportunity for the young people in Africa to help grow the industry here through all phases of the operations. And I think one thing that we do, and as OEMs we can do, is to sponsor different types of organisations. You know, I'm very proud of what we do, for example, as part of our corporate social responsibility. We call it Boeing Global Engagement, to work with young people at school age to really get them interested in STEM, because obviously that's a great gateway into not only aviation, but the jobs that are going to be important for the 21st century. And also particularly focusing on underrepresented people, particularly young girls. And look, we've, since 2006, we've invested quite a lot of money in these sorts of programs. We're very proud of them, and it's something that we will definitely look to continue. And I think it's important to help the growth of the industry here.
There's someone in this room who delivers a fantastic STEM program called the iFly program. So if you haven't met Derek, I'll introduce you later, but that's exactly the sort of thing that I'd love to see Boeing supporting. Thank you. Andrew, we've got infrastructure, we've got finance, we've got talent. What else does Africa need?
Well, it's certainly all of the above. I think what people in this room sense is that financial strength is what really unlocks the potential of Africa, and that the airlines need to be financially stronger. So how do we get there? Well, one thing that COVID has taught us, I think, is that aviation is key to trade and development. You know, when we were all locked down and nobody was flying, governments realized that it was a real blocker on trade. Mm-hmm. So certainly aviation needs the support of governments. I think that's clear, but it has to be the right sort of support and constructive support. It is infrastructure, it's skills, it's making sure the airlines can operate in the right environment. It's not about bailing out unprofitable airlines. It's about investing so that the airlines can be free to operate in a competitive manner and an efficient manner, and hopefully be stronger through financial strength.
Fantastic. I'm very impressed none of you mentioned SATAM as one of the things Africa needs to realise its potential. What sort of a difference would that make, Andrew, do you think, maybe to your market outlook, for example?
It certainly makes a big difference. I mean, I hinted on it, and the environment that the governments must create is that competitive environment. So competition is key, and open access to markets rather than protection of markets is key to the growth. And yes, it would stimulate the growth for sure.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to ask the guys to throw the poll back up and see what you thought of our presentations today. John, do we have time for questions from the audience? Where are you? Yes, awesome. So we're going to throw the poll back up, and I'm going to ask you to vote again. So, you know, let's, as I said, poke the ant's nest a little bit and see who impressed you the most. But we do have time for a couple of questions from the audience. So if you've got any burning questions, please raise your hand. And I think there's a roving mic that will come and find you. Fantastic.
Yes. Tanya, introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning, panelists. It's Ghata-Aura from Air Botswana. I am particularly interested in the XLR project. How is it progressing? Because we happen to be at the tip of the southern end of the continent, and we have a lot of tourists coming from the northern hemisphere. But the numbers are not exactly that can support wide bodies. So we just want to know the progress of that project, how it is going specifically, and when do you see it happening? Thank you.
Andrew, I guess you're best placed to answer that, right?
So the progress is there for sure. You may have seen that the XLR flew for the first time just a few weeks ago. So it's now flying, it's in its flight test campaign, entry into service in 2026. A lot of interest in the aircraft, obviously, as it sort of gives, you know, single aisle operators and A320 family operators room to grow their networks into new areas. The big challenge, of course, for us is availability of the aircraft. You know, single aisle backlog is huge, and one of the big challenges we have is that airlines can't get them soon enough. So, but yeah, the program is progressing as it should.
It's a nice problem to have when there's too much demand, right? Yeah. I think you're all in the same position.
Happy with that, Gatanya? Good. Okay, anybody else? Hands? Anybody waving? Aha, yes, Derek wants to ask a question. Over we go. So we just talked about iFly. This is Derek from Airspace Africa and iFly.
Yeah, thank you. Derek from Airspace Africa, as I said. I actually initially wanted to ask a question, but Kuljit did a great job in covering a bit of it, and was centered on diversity, but I still want to throw the question around to the rest of the OEMs, and perhaps even back to Kuljit. As far as diversity goes, I know you're doing a lot of work at the grassroots. How conscious are you, though, as OEMs, of the lack of diversity, especially at your level? When we come to these forums, I don't see, for example, women coming up to represent the OEMs, and I don't even see enough Africans coming to these platforms, which are forums for the African people. How conscious are you of that, and what efforts are you making to change that?
Kuljit.
Look, a couple of things. I mean, at the corporate level, you know, we release a diversity and inclusion report. We're extremely transparent. We know that we're nowhere near where we need to be in terms of representation across the board, but at least we're transparent about it. You know, right from the top of the company, it's more than just here's the report, but people actually believe in it, and that's really, really important. And I think it's important to understand that the people in the company believe that the corporation believes in it. So that's number one. You know, number two, I just go back to, you know, I'm new to representing our company in Africa. My first engagement actually was at the AFRA conference in Nairobi. And I've got to say that I was, and I'm sure this was less by design than just these were the best people to do this job, but I was really proud how we showed up at that conference. I mean, look, I was born in Africa. You know, I was only one when we left Africa, but my family history is all here. We had my colleagues from Seattle, one who's Ugandan by birth. We've got people who are Ghanaian heritage, and I loved how we showed up at that. And for me, that's the best way that this can happen, that we select the right people for the jobs, and they're the best people. And for me, the representation aspect of it and what the message it sends out, from my perspective, is extremely important. And I'm just very proud of what we're doing in that. So a great question, Derek. Thank you.
Okay, we can do one more. Last one, if there is one. If there isn't, you can wrap up, Joe. Last chance, going once, going twice. Okay.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, guys. That was a really interesting discussion. You managed not to throw any chairs at each other, so thank you for that.